Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Phil Lindsey. Two things about the 6M podcast before we get underway here today. Number one, when I first started this show, the idea behind it was I want to do things other than pro wrestling. Okay, I've podcasted a lot about pro wrestling in my time, and I thought, I'm also a comic book guy, and I like pop culture, and I'm into music and movies and books and whatnot. So there's other stuff to talk about. So why don't I do that? So the idea behind the 6M was I'm only going to talk about the big stuff. I mean, like the most important movies, the biggest albums, the biggest bands, the most monumental, like this is the greatest thing you've ever heard. This is the greatest thing you've ever read. It's the greatest thing you ever watched. It worked out fine for a bit until it got to be, well, I'd like to talk about this one thing. It didn't make a lot of money at the box office. Well, I don't care. Let's just talk about it. So that's what happened. And sometimes music would fall into that category. And because, look, kids, we've said it a million times, we said it once on the show here before, this is all subjective. The stuff we're going to talk about today, you may disagree with everything we're saying. You're wrong. And that's okay to be wrong. Okay. It's 2024. It's okay to be wrong. But look, I say that because what we're talking about here today, if you got a problem with this, I don't know what to tell you. All right. Because number two, real quick, the second thing about the 6M, that logo you're looking at right now? Take a look at that 6M logo. Does that look familiar to you? Well, it should, because that sucker was inspired by the logo of Run DMC. That's what I wanted to go for. It's got a vibe of, I wanted to show that, it's like a marquee of an old-fashioned theater, like maybe in the 50s and 60s, so it's got that aesthetic to it. But the basis of that logo is I tell the graphic designer, the Run DMC logo? I want it to look like that. I want it to have that layout. So yes, that's who we're talking about here today is Run DMC. And I'm telling you, man, if you're of a certain age and you grew up with this stuff, you've probably got a soft spot in your heart for them. And if you came along after the fact and you discovered them later, then you understand what true pioneers these guys are. And I don't want to give away too much in the intro because we're going to get there. But first, let's say this. Run DMC was an American hip-hop group from Hollis, Queens, New York City, formed in 1983 by Joseph Simmons, Darren McDaniels, and Jason Mizell. Run DMC is regarded as one of the most influential acts in the history of hip-hop culture, and especially one of the most famous hip-hop acts of the 1980s. Along with the Beastie Boys, LL Cool J, DJ Jazzy Jeff, and the Fresh Prince, and Public Enemy, the group pioneered new school hip-hop music and helped usher in the golden age of hip-hop. The group was among the first to highlight the importance of the MC and DJ relationship. And years active, what we had in front of us here, 1983 to 2002, and then 2012 to 2023. And yes, let me tell you, kids, as we said before, this is a big one because these guys deserve all the flowers. And we got a lot to talk about here today, but that essentially is your lowdown for Run DMC. So, Phil, we've only mentioned Run DMC in passing. You and I have both met DMC at various points, and your picture is much cooler than mine is, because I remember I shared my picture of me and DMC with you, and you sent me yours, and I'm like, well, his is so much better, right? But still, he's a great dude. You know this. What's your overall view as we get started here today? How would you introduce this act, maybe to someone who had not heard of them? How would you start off?
I would say one of the most iconic, influential hip hop groups of all time. There's no way in the world you have never heard a Run DMC song. It's just not possible. I mean, at some point, one of their songs has been used as placement in some kind of commercial, a movie, something. There's been a snippet of Run DMC in something. There's been something where somebody did an homage to them, where someone dressed like them. It's impossible to say you have never heard a Run DMC song. Maybe you just didn't know it was them.
It's amazing sometimes, man. My son's 15. He knows them because of me, but I don't know if he knows them any other way. But he has a lot of, he has very, he knows current hip hop acts, but his tunnel vision is extreme to the point of I'm trying to break him out of his shell a little bit. So he's starting to listen to older R&B soul music and current R&B stuff that's like throwback to 70s style soul. But I don't know how much DMC he actually knows. But man, you're right. That stuff's been used so much since the 80s and in all different walks of life and movies and TV and streaming shows and jingles, I'm sure along the way. Like, man, these guys did it all. Did Had a movie and everything, man. They did it all in their time, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that they were one of those initial pioneers in the genre, right up there with Beastie Boys and Fat Boys as well. Fat Boys
Mhm.
were very popular in that time period as well. Also had a movie.
That's right. That's right. Oh, I remember the Fat Boys, man.
Whenever I think of them, I think of Disorderlies, and they were also what's the other movie they were in?
I gotta do a podcast on the Fat Boys, dude. Come on.
But yeah, Disorderlies, I think of all time. One of the most famous hip hop groups of all time, Fat Boys. I don't think they always get their flowers.
They don't. I think they were considered more of a sort of a haha good times fun act instead of more of a straight laced serious rap act. You know what I mean?
That makes sense.
Yeah. Look, to your point, Run DMC is just. I sent you a link today, and we talked about it before we started recording here today. About there's a documentary, Kids on the Peacock. It's 3 parts. Came out earlier this year in 2024. You should go check it out. It's worth your time. It's really well done. There's no narration. It's all done in their words, which is always nice. And they try to speak to guys that helped them along the way, and rappers that there's Rick Rubin's in this, LL Cool J's in this, Salt and Pepper's in this. I mean, it's a who's who of artists these guys have inspired over the years for sure. Curtis Blow's in this for obvious reasons. I mean, just again, a who's who. I mean, Phil, we've said this before about other things that we talked about here on the show. I just cannot imagine what would have happened if, for whatever reason, Run DMC, if it didn't click in the beginning. I mean, hip hop, I'm sure probably would have still happened, but I don't know who would have been it, because you could argue Beastie Boys doesn't happen if not for Run DMC, so you can't really say the Beasties would have happened regardless. Like, it's crazy to think that these 3 guys inspired so much of not just artists but a genre to really take the main stage, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, I would say that they were the first hip hop group that really crossed over. I mean, whether that be things like Walk This Way, the movies, and I mean, again, there's so many things in pop culture that are immediately linked to. Uh, I mean, whether it just be the top hats, pair of Adidas. There's so many movies I can think of where there's a Run DMC song that is a big part of the movie. Like, what's the Seth Rogen Christmas movie a few years ago with Anthony Mackie and JGL, and Christmas and Hollis is such a big part of that movie.
Dude, it's in my rotation of Christmas music every year. I freaking love that song. Yeah, again, pop culture, man, there's something cool about them. Like, and to your point, like we're speaking about, cultural significance, man, the music just speaks to everybody. It doesn't matter what color you are, what your background is. Like, everybody can, and this is all due respect to NWA. You can kind of understand why certain segments of American culture they might appreciate NWA, but they can't relate. They don't really know what the guys are talking about because it's not their experience. But with Run DMC, it's your basic sort of call and response. Who's the best DJ? Who's the best MC? I'm the best. I'm the king of rock. There isn't higher. All that stuff. Like, Phil, that's crossover stuff that you don't necessarily have to have a certain way of life or have a certain background to appreciate, which I think is what makes them, so available to basically everyone that wants to listen to them, man.
Yeah, talk about one of the most memorable opening lines from any rap song ever. I'm the king of rock. There is none higher. Sucker MCs, they call me sire. That's just, I mean, immediately quotable. And of course, if you are a wrestling fan, that is also in Ready to Rumble.
It is in Ready to Rumble. Yeah, I forgot about that, man. Up until today, and I'm embarrassed I didn't know this, I didn't realize that Run DMC played Live Aid.
They did.
I did not know that, dude. That footage is wild to see because they'd only been around for like 15 minutes and they were terrified of being on stage. And there's 100,000 people in that crowd and they were throwing their hands up and getting into the music. I'm like, this is the best thing ever, man.
Yeah. The Christmas movie I was thinking of was The Night Before, by the way.
That's it. Yeah. I don't know how I didn't know those guys were at Live Aid till today, man. That's freaking nuts. That's nuts. But yeah, that's what a time to be alive during the 80s, man. I remember because in 83 I was 10 when these guys got together and Yo MTV Raps wasn't even a thing yet. And there's a lot to talk about. Phil, this is one of those shows that could last 4 hours if we wanted to and have 4 parts. If we really wanted to do this thing justice, but we'll try to hit everything as quick as we can here for the sake of, letting people get back to their lives, I guess. But it should be stated, Phil, that back then MTV only played rock and they wanted nothing to do with hip hop. It was in their defense, it was a new genre. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, you can only keep this quiet for so long. Eventually, you're going to have to pay attention because something's happening out there. And which is how Run DMC got on MTV. But dude, they were the only act that MTV, because they couldn't ignore them after a while. But then, Rick James had always, MTV would never play Rick James. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, I know who Rick James was. My mom was a fan of an eclectic, a selection of music that maybe you wouldn't expect in a southern home in North Carolina, but she loved all kinds of stuff, including Rick James. And it's like, dude, you couldn't see that stuff on MTV, but there again, Phil, like we said earlier, pioneers, they broke it open, Run DMC, because MTV could ignore them for that long,
Yeah, there were no black people on MTV until Michael Jackson kicked that door in.
True.
And yeah, hip hop music was just starting to bubble in the early 80s. And like thinking about it now in 2024, hip hop is everywhere. Like it's undeniable. I mean, we just passed the Olympics. Hip hop was like a huge part of the Olympics. I was surprised how big of it was. Like Snoop was out there, Flavor Flav was in a crowd. He was a big part of everything. They had a breaking competition at the Olympics, where even during the breaking competition, they were playing some music, and I was like, this music is really playing in Paris at the Olympics. Go figure.
Dude, I just saw the headline. They're not going to have breakdance in the 2028 Olympics because it's considered like maybe the most expensive competition because they have to pay for licensing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, breakdancing is an Olympic sport. Listen, I'll raise my hand and admit I didn't know that was a thing either.
It is kind of sad that it didn't get a chance to have the competition in LA in 2028, because I feel like that would have been huge.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Because, some people are not going to travel that far. Like, yeah, dude, I think you're right about that. That would have been, I mean, especially with the music scene in that town. Crazy. Yeah. And again, kids, a lot to get through here. Not get through, but a lot to cover here. I mean, we talked about them doing Live Aid and, look, Phil, if nothing else, the aesthetic of Run DMC. These 3 guys on stage. Darren McDaniel, a huge comic book guy. I mean, that he's put in his fair share of time at the Comic Cons over the years, which is how I think we both met him. Big comic book guy. I mean, they're all in costumes. The hats, the glasses, the chains, the tracksuits, the Adidas, and credit and rest in peace to Jam Master Jay for giving them their look. Because if not for him rocking the Adidas, maybe the group never wears this stuff. But dude, they look like something straight out of a comic book, don't they?
Oh yeah, they immediately have a known look. I mean, when you look at like the cover of King of Rock, and it's just the top of their heads, and you can see them with the glasses and the top hats. Like, you don't need to see anything else; they're immediately recognizable. And that's just like, that goes to show like their style really like transcended the act in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, dude, we talked about that logo is iconic. Just the logo itself.
Yes. Yeah, they had it down pat. I mean, they were a part of the collection of artists that made Def Jam the place to be. Not just because of, Run being there, of course, Russell Simmons being the head of it, Unfortunately, Russell has some accusations linked to him now that have kind of tarnished his legacy. But
Yes.
regardless, Def Jam as a label, you couldn't get any bigger than Def Jam in hip hop at one point.
That's true. I mean, they were the hottest. It was the hottest label around for sure. Yeah. And Run not looking especially healthy in this doc, I have to say. Um, don't know how
When was it
guilty or
made?
it was this year actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I haven't seen Run in a while. Definitely, even in his older age, one of the most recognizable guys in hip hop.
Hmm.
Notable hip hop character. I think that I have this theory on hip hop, and not just the quality of talent and the quality of the music. A lot of these guys that last the longest are recognizable figures in hip hop, whether it just be like the way they dress, just how outlandish they are, how recognizable their voice is. Like Snoop Dogg is perfect example of that. Um, Snoop is immediately recognizable in a room,
Oh
like
yeah.
straight away, from the way he looks, the way he talks, the way he carries himself. And Run is kind of the same way. So he was the perfect. I don't want to say frontman because it was equally him and DMC. But when you think Run DMC, Run is like immediately recognizable.
Hmm. Yeah, and part of this doc, kids, they talk about these guys were pretty humble guys. Jay and Daryl continued to be humble, and then somehow, when they really started to get famous, Jay's persona began to not Jay, excuse me, but Run's persona began to change a little bit, and it was a little arrogant, a little cocky, kind of feeling himself. The other two guys would sit back, be kind of quiet, and then he's kind of representing and taking center stage and like, but there again, Phil, you have to have some sort of level of bravado, especially like for three African American guys who are even though the music's starting to take off, some radio stations are not going to play their stuff. It took a while to get on MTV. They're not going to get into certain places. Then the Beastie Boys comes along and they get into everywhere. Every radio station plays Beastie Boys, and it's like, you know, I'm sure it takes a level of maybe you call it ego or arrogance or just confidence to say, look, we deserve to be where we are and we deserve better than what we have now.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, to go with what you're saying about Run just stepping out and just again, just how recognizable his voice is, just this very high energy. I don't want to say high pitched, but just very recognizable. It almost feels like he's like screaming at you through through the stereo every time
Yeah.
you cut his music on, and that was a big part of hip hop at that time. Because even when you listen to Beastie Boys, it almost feels like they're attacking your ears.
Yeah. It's true. He had that, I don't want to call it a growl, but he does have that shout, not scream, but it's more of a shout. Is that how you
Yeah,
describe it? Yeah.
yeah, I would say that. Like it just feels like he's coming straight through the speakers on you.
Yeah. And it's stark contrast to DMC, who's, I remember the VH1 Behind the Music several years back when that was really a big thing on that channel. But when DMC's voice changed, and then everything changed about the act because it was never the same again, because his cadence was off, his tone had lowered substantially, and he wasn't up like he used to be. So it's a different sounding act when that change happens. But you're right, like the contrast between Run and Daryl was, I mean, it was tremendous. It was the ebb and flow of the group and how they sounded. It was awesome. What do you think about that, dude, in terms of their sound? If you were comparing them to like a Public Enemy or to NWA, maybe, who came a little bit later, or even Beastie Boys. I mean, no, none of those guys really sound like Run DMC at all, man. Not a bit, really.
No, I think straight away you got this tandem between him and DMC that was so smooth, and they had such great chemistry on
Hmm.
records. It's way different from something like Public Enemy, where Chuck is really the front man. Like he's the established front man. His voice carries the records. A lot of times that back and forth between Run and DMC was really what made a lot of those songs stand out.
Oh yeah, dude, that's a good point. Yeah, and again, we talk about who's mainstream and who's not during this time. Like Beasties became mainstream. Run DMC were absolutely mainstream. But I do think it's a lot of that where it's, look, for example, Busta Rhymes is freaking great. But I could, when he first broke out on his own, even though it was genius stuff, I could actually see a bit somebody, that's not for me. It's a little too goofball for me or something. But like you appreciate his genius later on. But when DMC hit the stage, it wasn't that at all. It was, these guys are cool. They sound cool. They look cool. They've got a vibe. And dude, this thing about finishing each other's sentences, anyone that tells me rap is not an art form has obviously never heard Run DMC perform a song together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but there's so many of those. Like, I mean, that's a big part of King of the Rock. Like the call and response of him starting the record and DMC finishing lines on some of the first verse. It just immediately makes you as an audience member want to do the same call and response with them.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Sometimes I miss, and look, you tell me if I'm wrong here. I don't know of a lot of acts that are still doing that style today. I mean, is there still a place for that? I want to say old school, but I don't even know if that's right to call it that. But just that, I'm the best MC. You know what I mean? That sort of vibe that they always had during that era, and other acts had too. Is there still a place for that today, or do you think that rap culture's kind of passed that by to some degree, or no?
No, I think that there's still a time for it. I think that the genre has moved kind of fast past those kind of days.
Sure.
There are still MCs that care about being the best, that care about proving that they're the best, whether it be through rap beef, like we just went through the never-ending Drake and Kendrick saga.
Yeah.
And so that is still a part of hip hop, but it's not as big as it was then. Because back then you had to be nice. If you could not rap, you weren't taken as seriously. Like you can be a decent rapper today, and everything else about you is the appeal of it, the sale of it. It's not so much like, oh, I'm better than everybody else. That's not the appeal like it used to be. Like I was just talking to somebody and I was saying, when you used to do promo and go to radio shows, you had to rap. You had to show up with a verse. If they asked you to freestyle, you had to have a verse. You don't have to do that no more.
Right. Dude, it kind of feels, look, times change and you get different perspectives based on the way the world is. It kind of feels like sing for your supper kind of thing. Like, are rock guys asked to show up with their guitar at a radio interview? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's odd, isn't it?
No, but I think a lot of the history of hip hop is why that's a thing. Because I mean, a big part of rap was showing up somewhere, showing up to a park in a circle in a cipher, and that person shows up like, hey, spit what you got, and hey, let me or come battle this guy up here, or like ciphers were such a big part of hip hop that when you show up and you're like around a bunch of other artists and you're around a bunch of other enthusiasts for the genre, it's just like, hey man, you got a verse? Because that used to be the thing when you met up with people in the park or at school.
Yeah, that makes sense. Some of it just always felt a little bizarre to me, but the way you're explaining it makes total sense. I've done this before. I've thrown around the Lennon McCartney comparison before. I've done it with Q-Tip and Five Dog, and I think I've done it with other folks. I mean, is that what we're looking at with Run and DMC here? I mean, is that what we're saying? Is that they're one guy's not the same without the other, and they both happen to come together at the perfect time? Is that the kind of magic we're looking at here, you think?
Yeah, I think that they both complemented each other really well. And I mean, Jam Master Jay as well contributed a lot to the group.
Yeah.
Whether that be their sound. I mean, early on, scratching and the DJing was a big part of their sound. It wasn't just their verses and their chemistry on the records. And I know, like for some people, Run DMC, some of their more rock stuff hit harder for people, and I think that that's where they started to cross over more. But still, like their early stuff, like think of Tricky. Like Tricky, you can't think of Tricky without like the scratches and like the DJing around it.
So good. It's so good. For some reason, the and now I won't remember the movie. Was it Road Trip? And they had the DJ Qualls. They were at the Black University, and DJ Qualls got up on the stage and was dancing to "Tricky" by Run DMC. For some reason, that has always stayed with me. It's a
I
great
thought
movie, by the way.
I thought you were gonna say White Girls.
I was not gonna say White Girl.
I thought you were gonna say White Girls because, of
Oh
course, when they
Lord.
have the dance battle in White Girls, "Tricky" is one of the songs they plays.
Of course. Man, what a great song. Oh, that could be a whole other show by itself, just their catalog, for not even talking about their style and what they meant to the genre and to the pop culture at large, but man, their catalog, dude, just I don't want to get ahead of myself. You mentioned Jay, and I 100% agree with you. I don't believe that they're the same act without him, and he contributed way more than I think people realize. Talk about, in your opinion, what's different with Jay taking that spot as DJ versus somebody else? What do you think he brought to them that maybe they wouldn't have gotten with another guy?
I think you had a guy that was willing to play his role, and I think he contributed, like you said earlier, when it came to like, hey, this is what we should look like. This is what the aesthetic should be. Um, it just wouldn't be the band without him. I mean, to go with your Beatles comparison, he was Ringo, and not that Ringo was not talented.
Mm.
A lot of what we always heard from the Beatles is that Ringo brought the cool factor to the group. He contributed to the way that they talked. Um, he brought this style in the way that he appeared, the way he dressed. And I think it's kind of the same way here that the group is just not the same without him.
Yeah, dude. And look, to your point, other DJs throughout space and time have said, I wouldn't be a DJ if not for this guy. That's very telling that he inspired a whole wave of people that came after him, man.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started listening to rap music, uh, the combo of rapper and DJ, there's two big examples that always made me think this is so cool. Like either Run DMC or of course Fresh Prince and Jazzy Jeff.
Yeah, yeah. Give Jeff his flowers, by the way, Phil, because like he deserves it, doesn't he? I think he's kind of an unsung hero of that act, I believe.
Yeah, Jeff, every time I think of Jeff and he does his interviews and he talks about like, I don't know, his this guy that he came up with is one of his best friends. Is one of the most famous guys in the entire world now. And on one interview they asked him what does he think is the most well-known rap song of all time. And he said, you know, this is going to sound crazy, but the theme song to Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And when he said it, I was like, wait a minute. Then I was like, but he's right. Most people can rap the entire song.
Yes, 100% for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, man. I love Jeff. Again, doesn't get enough credit.
Still incredibly talented.
Right? Yeah. I mean, who else would you put in that class? I mean, it's a big class, man. There's other guys out there. The DJ for Beastie Boys, and I can never remember his name, but he's awesome.
DJ slash producers, of course, DJ Premier.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, Jeff, Jam Master Jay, Guru, of course, part of Gangstar. Sorry, I said Guru. I'm sorry, I meant Premier because Premier is the Guru is the rapper. Somebody's gonna snatch my hip hop card.
Was Grandmaster Flash, or am I getting him confused with somebody else? I know he was MC, but did he start off as a DJ or no?
I don't remember. That was a little bit before my time.
Uh-huh.
Mad Libs is a little bit later. Mad Libs is also great DJ slash producer.
Right.
It's kind of a dying art form, though. The actual like legitimate DJ that doesn't want to be the forefront of the act, that is fine with playing his role.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lost art.
And I don't want to not acknowledge that subculture of the genre here, but because I would suspect that there are people who have the same conversations about DJs, Phil, as some people would have about guitarists, where it's like, yeah, you know how to play the chords, but there's no heart behind this. There's no soul. You don't have rhythm. You know how to scratch, but you know what I mean? I mean, I imagine that's going on there too, isn't it?
Oh, it's a different era, man. I don't want to sound like the old head here, but this era now where you don't need to know how to mix anymore, because
Right.
there are programs where you could just put the songs and it'll queue it up and pick songs that have the same tempo and beat per minute, and it'll start blending them for you. You don't have to know how to mix anymore, man. Like, there are so many programs where the technology does it for you. Uh, that art form of everybody knowing how to mix and scratch over mixes and do all of the effects and stuff themselves. It's not the same, man. It's not the same time anymore.
I hate it. I hate it. I I, I just feel like you're. Look, I'm everyone relax. I'm not saying you're not doing some work, right? Because if you paint it with a broad brush, you're suggesting that these guys aren't doing the work. But what I am saying is, man, your work's a heck of a lot easier than it was in the '80s.
It's definitely easier. It's just a different time. I mean, you can set up your DJ program and have your entire library of music in there. And you could start playing a song, and it'll already start sorting on the side, a good program. It'll
Mm-hmm.
start sorting on the side for you other songs that are already at that same beat per minute that you could think about blending with that song. It'll start making the distinctions for you. You used to have to just count it. You used to have to just know, hey, this song is this tempo, it's this beat per minute. I kind of have an idea that I want to put this record on and mix it.
Yeah, and look, you either have an ear for it, Phil, or you don't. That's another problem too.
Yeah, I know. You don't have to always have an ear for it. Like, this the same thing with production now. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, now you don't. You did then.
I mean, but I think that's to your point earlier about, is rap the same way where it's about being the best? For some people, it is. Some people still very much care about the craft. Some people still care about um, being considered the top of their class. Um, but you can get famous for so many things other than your talent now. Like, being
Mm.
talented is kind of the afterthought of it. It's crazy enough for a lot of these people. Um, just being able to get online and promote yourself and go viral, man, you could go famous. You could go viral and be famous for all of these things that have nothing to do with your music.
Mm-hmm. You're right, man. It's a
It's just
different
a
world out there.
it's just a different time. And I'm not saying that any of that is bad, because I do think that there are positives about that. Um, when you think about the time that the Beastie Boys and Run DMC and all these guys came up in, just think about that time period and how different it is if they had the power of the internet and they had the power to promote their own music. They didn't
Oh
have to
man.
wait for the label to promote them. They could be their own A&R in some ways. Um, it's just a different game.
Yeah, and you're right. And we said earlier even as famous as they were getting, they still were not getting in everywhere. I mean, eventually, you couldn't deny the people wanted to hear them, and that they
Yeah,
were success. And dude, that was before the Aerosmith thing even happened.
yeah. I mean, at that time, you had to take your record to radio. You had to get radio and DJs are all over the world to break your record. You don't
Mm.
have to do that anymore. You could just release your music whenever you want through the internet.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
You, I mean, you still want, influencers and DJs to play your music, but you can always get buzz throughout the internet without even having to reach them first.
Right. Man, you're right, dude. Different world. I mean, like you said, them having to go to the radio stations and having their before and again before they even hooked up with Rick Rubin. Like
Hmm.
there are people, going out and I mean, dude, they got on American Bandstand, and kudos to Dick Clark, who, for everything that I've ever known about the guy, he never cared about, skin color or anything else. He knew what a hit was, and he would put acts on his stage that maybe you'd never heard of because he knew they had something. And he was dead right. He was right about a lot of people he put on his show over the years, and Run DMC was one of those acts. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy, man.
Yeah, but I mean, just that time period, and we talk about like their look and just how polished they were by the time that they did come on. They had to look, they had to act. Um, it's just a different time with the record label and the A&R actually doing the job to make you media trained, to work your record and actually put out the best single and prepare the artists. And that's another part of what made Def Jam, Def Jam. Def Jam was churning out artists that were ready for the main stage. They were churning out stars, and they were immediately, giving them the presentation and all these things to succeed.
Mm. Dude, they had a shoe deal.
Yeah.
A freaking rap act, man. Unheard of at the time. Crazy.
Yeah. They changed the game. I mean,
yeah,
they changed the game forever for a lot of rappers and a lot of people that came behind them. They opened the door for rap artists to get money through a shoe company or to get placement in other avenues that we weren't in.
Right. There's a great clip from that doc where they're talking about the when the Adidas deal happened, and that they're on stage at this concert somewhere. The place is sold out, and Run tells everyone to take off their Adidas and hold them up so they can see them. And they leave the stage that way and tell everybody good night, and all these thousands of people are holding up these shoes. And the Adidas guy was backstage and apparently gets a call from his boss and tells him, give them whatever they want. Doesn't matter. Pay the guys. Like, because they saw the impact they had on one show. It's like, this is not an aberration. These guys are making so much noise that people want to dress like them. It's crazy.
Yeah. I believe Run told that story on his old reality show, Run's House, which Run's House was great. It was, of course, about Run and his family. But I believe he told that story on there. And when he tells the story about how he went down and took his shoe off, and by the time he put his shoe in the air, he looked around and he saw how many shoes were up, and he couldn't believe it. Like,
yeah,
like he just couldn't believe it. It just it kind of reminds me. I don't know if you've ever seen the Josie and the Pussycats movie. No. And Josie's up there, and the whole backing behind her, the machine behind her, is getting all of her fans to wear these headphones. And they have the cat ears on top. And so when she gets on stage, like, she's looking out at the audience, they all have these cat ears on, and she goes to take hers off, and the whole crowd starts taking them off at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Like, when you just look and see, like, really how much influence you have as an artist and how much people are really paying attention to what you do and say. These are guys that are just like you said, humble beginnings from New York. And man, you'd be hard pressed to find any artist that did more for Adidas as a brand than they did.
I mean, listen, when I think Nike, I think I'm always going to think Jordan. I don't, I just can't. It's the first thing that comes to my head. When I think Adidas, I don't think of anything but DMC first and foremost. That's just how it is.
Yeah. They made shell toes popular.
Yeah.
They made you want to go buy shell toes.
Yeah, for sure. Man, that look. Holy cow. And there's nothing to it. I mean, later they transitioned to black leather, and you thought they didn't look cool before. Put these three cats in black leather and they'll show you something. And I'm like, God, how did they go from looking cool to looking cooler? How does that happen, Phil? It's like they did the reverse, like the Beatles started in leather and ended up in suits. They did the reverse and still looked awesome.
Yes.
Such good stuff, man. Yeah, had the shoe deal. And, you talked about the rock and roll influence. That's, kids, you have Darren McDaniel to thank for that, because he was the one saying, look, everyone's sampling funk, everyone's sampling soul, everyone's sampling disco, nobody's sampling rock. These songs are hitting hard. I mean, dude, I think when I met him, he had a Guns N' Roses t-shirt on. He's a rock and roll guy as well as a hip-hop guy. And, Phil, without Daryl raising his hand and saying, this is what we should be doing, we don't get the Run DMC we know today. And you could argue that maybe they're still legends, maybe, but maybe they don't have the impact that they have that we've known for years, if not for what Daryl brought to the group with that suggestion in the first place.
They definitely don't cross over. They definitely don't do the Aerosmith record and everything that came with the Aerosmith record. They don't do the Living Color record and everything. Their careers are completely different if they don't do that.
It's crazy. Yeah. Again, what they brought, and it's just, I can't wrap my head around. And again, this way we kicked off the show is that how much they truly achieved and how much of legends these three guys truly are. If not for that. I mean, we talked about, I don't know if I realized this, because when I was growing up, again, I listened to various different kinds of music. I knew who Billy Squier was. I liked Billy Squier. I didn't realize that one of their first hits was the first time that Daryl recommended was Rockbox. And that was sampled from a Billy Squier tune. I don't think I even know that at the time, but like that was the first hit they had that sampled rock and roll. And it's like, again, like you said, everything comes after that.
Boink Studios is the home of Tom Clark's main event, Tom Clark's 6M podcast, and Two Nations Under Ted, a Ted Lasso podcast. Visit the site today for links to every podcast platform, social media, special announcements, and a lot more. Check out the site and bookmark today, boinkstudios.com.
Aside from the band, their style, what these guys brought to the table, again, it's not Run DMC without the three of them. You take one guy off that stage, Phil, it's not the same act. But at the same time, you could also, I think with just as much conviction say, as you just suggested, if the rock and roll thing doesn't happen, they don't cross over. Dude, has there been a moment that you can recall that was, I mean, there have been big moments in hip hop since then. What beats them crossing over with Aerosmith and, I mean, knocking down walls that had never been knocked down before?
Yeah, I mean, literally in the video, knocking down the wall. Such an iconic video, such an iconic visual of them being on separate sides of the room, and then eventually coming together and performing together. And that laid the groundwork for so many different things. I mean, when you think about them performing with Kid Rock and what that did for Kid Rock's career, that guy ended up being kind of a loser. But
yes.
that was a big part of his rise at one point, was performing with them because of what that meant, what that signified. I mean, even other artists that crossed over, and they also did the collaborations with rock artists. It started with them doing it. It started with them opening that door and making a song with Aerosmith.
Does that song hold up for you? Is it so overplayed you can't stand it anymore? Be honest.
Oh, no, it still lives up.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't listen to it all the time, but
Sure.
every now you hear it, it's like it's a classic record.
Someone said, don't rap over the song, rap the song. You can make this work. The way the lyrics are cut, you can put this to a beat and it will still work. You don't have to change anything. And it's like, dude, Phil, that by itself is genius. Like they could have changed every lyric and maybe Aerosmith would have said, well, then we're not doing it. I don't know how that plays out, but dude, they just sang the song. It's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I just can't think of anything else. And I'm sure there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since then, but I don't know, man. Just the idea of this has not really happened all that much. And, there continues to be, well, we're on this side of the road, they're on that side, which has never made any sense to me at all. But, Phil, look at what we have now. We have African Americans in the country music scene. By the way, if you like country, I feel bad for you because it's, that's neither here nor there.
You have guys that are rappers that do country music, like Shabuzi.
Yes.
Shabuzi is one of the biggest artists in the country right now. And
Crazy.
He's worked with Beyonce. He's charted very high this year. Yeah, I mean, like outside of Aerosmith and Run DMC, for my generation, you didn't get bigger than Jay-Z and Linkin Park. You just didn't get any bigger than that collaboration. But again, that I don't believe that happened if Run DMC and Aerosmith did come before it.
Yeah, you don't get Public Enemy and Anthrax, probably. That doesn't happen. You certainly don't get Rage Against the Machine. I think Tom Morello would probably be the first guy to say that.
Yeah.
If Run DMC didn't break the doors down to begin with.
Are you blaming Run DMC for Limp Bizkit?
I wasn't going to go there. I'm disappointed in you as my friend to have gone there.
Limp Bizkit had their run, though. I can't hate on them.
They did. Yeah, it was, even at their height when they were, it was okay to like them. That dude, his voice is still crap. I'm sorry. It's still crap. I can't.
But even when you listen to his voice, there are the clear influences to Run. Like, it's undeniable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, his tone. I get it. Yeah. Yeah, that's hard to argue, honestly. And, look, there's something to be said here, and we haven't mentioned it yet, but I want everybody to understand what I'm getting ready to say and how important this is, all right? The Beatles had, and I don't want to misquote, I think the Beatles were 12 studio albums, if I'm getting the number right. Run DMC had 7 studio albums. Dude, I can't wrap my head around that. Like from 84 to 2001, and there were chunks of time where they didn't record through those years, but still 7 albums, Phil. We're not talking about a discography of 15 to 20 albums. We're talking 7 albums deep.
Mhm.
And these guys influenced so many artists, again, an entire genre. Like, dude, that's mind-blowing to me. I can't really grasp how big that is. But dude, that's huge, isn't it?
It is. I mean, their catalog, and I mean, just the amount of moments they've had as a group. Um, like you said, being able to say that you were on American Bandstand, you were at Live Aid, and in the early '90s when wrestling was bigger than anything in the country and pop culture, you were doing the DX remix.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And I mean, just how many things that they were a part of from like the '80s up into the late '90s. I mean, even like I'm saying, Run's House and the run that had on MTV, um, Run showing up places in his Rev Run with the collar thing,
Yeah.
doing the Jagged Edge Let's Get Married remix.
Oh, that's great stuff, man. Just to clarify, the Beatles had 13 studio albums from 19. Of course, theirs was 7 years, so it's a different animal, and we both know how insanely creative John and Paul were together and separately. But still, man, I can't wrap my head around that. Like, and we've talked about DMX, we've talked about the Beatles. Like has DMX's by the way, his number of albums to debut at number 1 on Billboard, has that been beaten since him or no?
I don't think that it has.
Man, the number's big. By the way, that episode's in archives, kids. It's a huge number. It's like 5 or 6, I think.
Yeah, I immediately got sad because somebody showed a clip of that versus with him and Snoop from the pandemic, and I was like, that was 4 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And man, that was the last time we saw him out and about in good spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And rest in peace to DMX.
Was that the clip of them? They were in some kind of studio somewhere, and they were like rapping songs. It's so fun to watch that, dude.
Yeah, that was from the Versus. Back when Versus was just on Instagram and it wasn't like this big production.
Right.
It was just people during the pandemic, artists getting together and playing their songs.
That's right. God, I did watch that, and I remember thinking, man, X is out of shape, and he even made jokes about it, which is fine. It happens. You get older, but man, he still had that stage presence, dude. Just in that little clip alone, he still had it.
Still had that stage presence. You could see how well him and Snoop got along.
Oh, yeah.
That they were actually like real friends, and just bits of it, like DMX doing his song, and Snoop would get up and start rapping the words with it to him for him, and it's just like, man, what a time. I miss DMX.
Oh, me too. Yeah, yeah. Legend. Absolute legend. Man, the tracks. And I said we're gonna hit eventually here. Dude, let's see. The number of music videos they had, it's a crazy big number. I mean, they've, King of Rock, of course, Rockbox puts them on the map. King of Rock happens. You Talk Too Much is after that. It's Tricky, My Adidas, Proud to Be Black, Walk This Way, of course, Mary Mary. I always love that. That's sample from a Monkees song, but great freaking song. Beats to the Rhyme, which is live. Christmas in Hollis, of course. Run's House. Dude, stuff that you never forget. Whose house? Like, tell me that's where Swerve got that. I assume it is, isn't it?
I don't know if that's where he got it, but had an immediate impact on hip hop. There's so many quotables that they had that were reoccurring quotables in other music. But I mean, again, like he had so many ways to start a record that were so memorable. And Run's House is another one. Just the way he starts that record, immediately memorable.
Oh, it's so good. And as far as Christmas music goes, I don't know if I like Christmas in Hollis better than Christmas. I think Christmas Is in '92 was a great tune as well. That's another great tune. What did you think about, and I'll call it their comeback album. Don't call it a comeback. In '93, I thought Down with the King was freaking great. What did you think about it? It was a little bit departure for them. The tone of that track's a little bit different. What did you think about that tune specifically?
I thought it was good. I thought for them it showed that they had some longevity. Um, the talent, like you just are never going to be able to take that away from him. I mean, Run, I think if you asked him to freestyle today, he's going to freestyle. And he's not going to just come out of his phone with something he wrote. He's going to actually freestyle, and it's going to sound good.
Mm. Yeah, that's fair. Pete Rock and CL Smooth on that as well, by the way. Another pair of legends. Yeah. God, man. Just so many tunes that you'll never forget. I mean, stuff is just, we talked about doing this episode and we were going to just pick an album. I'm like, let's just talk about the band. We can circle back later and pick an album. But what album for you personally do you think is the one? When you think of them, which album is it for you? Do you have one, or do you think of them just as a whole?
I think for so many of us, we just immediately think of all the tracks. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if you look them up at streaming right now, like a lot of people are not picking like whole albums. They're just picking like, oh, these are all the hits. I mean, now of course, I think Raising Hell has to be the big one because that had the crossover record on it with Walk This Way, had Tricky on it. What else is on the album? Off the
Oh,
top of
Peter
my head?
Piper's the first track, dude.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that
Love it.
I would say for them, it's probably Raising Hell.
Yeah. Because I can't say the name Peter Piper without wanting to rap it. And I'm not going to do it because I'm not good at that. But holy Lord, because it's just so memorable. Look, that album, to your point, Peter Piper, it's Tricky, My Adidas, Walk This Way, Is It Live, and Perfection is side one. Side two is Hit It Run is the first track on side two. I mean, Raising Hell's number two, You Be Illin. Another great song, dude. I freaking love You Be Illin. Dumb Girl, Son of Byford, and Proud to Be Black. And brother, let me tell you, I had this album at a time, let's see, this was in 86. I was 13. Tom was still strong in the church and went every Sunday and Wednesday. And Tom went and bought a cassette tape called Raising Hell. And dude, I hid this thing as much as I could. Like, my mom was good. She was good. But like, just when you're in certain worlds, you just don't, it's got a bad word on the cover. What's going on? Like, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard, man.
Yeah, I think we all had that moment as fans of hip hop, where it was just something so cool about the fact that it felt like this was something you're not supposed to have. You're not supposed to do it. And I mean, there's so many albums that I can think of off the top of my head where I'm not supposed to have this. Like, man, Outkast's entire discography, there was a period where almost all of the covers of the CD had a naked woman on it, and so it's like, okay, I'm not supposed to have this in my CD booklet. Let me put this all the way in the back of it, so hopefully nobody sees it. But yeah, it just was something about that time period. I mean, I remember when they put the parental advisory on the front, and you had to have a parent go with you to buy music.
Mm-hmm. God, I remember that. Do you remember what was the first parental advisory stickered album you had your mom or dad go with you to buy? Or do you remember? I think for me, it was the Use Your Illusion albums by Guns N' Roses, but I could be wrong. And I can't remember how old I was when those even came out.
I want to say it was their first Silk the Shock album. The one with It Ain't My Fault on it.
Right.
I think that's the first one that my parents went with me to buy. I distinctly remember the first CD I ever bought on my own, and I don't know how I got away with buying it, was Jay-Z Hard Knock Life. That was the first CD that I bought, and like somehow I went to the counter, paid for it, didn't have any problems.
Yeah, dude, listen, let's be honest. Some of those record store guys, CD store guys, man, after a while, they didn't really care too often.
After a while, they were like, yeah.
Just give me your money.
your parents outside, right? And they said, you can have this, right? Yeah, sure, go. Which, man, again, that totally different time period. Going into the record store and buying CDs the day of release, and it's not a thing anymore.
Not. I miss it so much. It's like new comic book day on every, if you're a comic book guy, Wednesday's a
Wednesday.
new comic book day, right? Like,
Yep.
yeah.
Music used to be every Tuesday, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right. Yeah, Tuesday.
But yeah, now a lot of stuff drops on streaming Friday, but it
God,
just doesn't
man.
hit that same vibe of waiting for something to come up on a streaming platform and just listening to it and actually going to the store and buying the physical disc or buying the tape and going through the liner notes. And it's just not the same. I mean, I'm old enough to remember also going to these record stores and like diving through record crates. Like that's not a thing anymore.
There is where I'm at right now is like literally 2 minutes from downtown here, and there's a used record store, and the dude's got folding table after folding table of crates, and I love going in there. And like it's a thing with me. I don't need vinyl to be in perfect condition. I'm not looking for mint. I don't need the $55 version of anything. $5-10, I'm good. Like, long as it plays, as long as it's not scratched all to pieces. It can have scratches, but dude, I do it now because of the nostalgia more than anything else.
Yeah, it's something about it. I mean, that was kind of that era of uh, discovering a part of the city, walking down the street, and going, "Oh, wait, that place has a record store. That place has a comic book store," and just walking around in there and seeing what they have in there. Um, I remember thinking that was one of the coolest parts of watching the Tribe Called Quest documentary and watching Q-Tip crate dive and watching him go through all of these uh, records trying to find something he wanted to sample. Uh, just cool. Just so much nostalgia that comes with it.
Yeah, great stuff. Now I want to go find Run DMC on vinyl. I may do that this week, actually. Not a bad idea. Look, we're talking about the tracks. Their first album was what, of course, put them on the map. Again, this is before the Aerosmith thing happens. And this was released March 27, 1984. The album is just called Run DMC. And off one album, you get Rockbox, you get Sucker MCs, you get Jam Master Jay, you get It's Like That. Off of the first album. Like, there's no, you can't overstate how important those songs were to just waking everybody up and giving them something they'd never heard before. I mean, again, that first album's a classic, man.
Yeah, those are formative records for hip hop, man. They created a lot of foundation for hip hop for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. And then let's see, the second album, King of Rock, like that cover you talked about. I mean, ballsy. This one came out a year later in 85. Dude, not even a year after the fact in 85. And ballsy. Rock the House, King of Rock. You talk too much. Can you rock it like this? I mean, it's, man, again, hit after hit after hit. And then, Walk This Way doesn't happen until Raising Hell, which is the third album, Phil. It's not even the first or second album for these guys. And then, you ask, how do you follow up Raising Hell? How about Tougher Than Leather in 88? I mean, that one's got Run's House, Mary Mary, I'm Not Going Out Like That. Let's see, They Call Us Run DMC, Beats to the Rhyme, Radio Station, Papa Crazy. Dude, I freaking love that song. It's, again, man, I just can't overstate the catalog these guys have. Back from Hell in 1990 is a little bit of a different record. A little bit of a different sound. Maybe not sound, but it did get some poor reviews from critics. But, Phil, critics are going to do what they do. It kind of felt like, I guess to some folks, it felt like maybe it was out of its time because Ice Cube and Ice-T and all that stuff had started happening. The more hardcore rap had happened. I mean, I don't know. Dude, I think you have to honestly be honest with yourself and say, look, bands have to survive. And sometimes you have to bend and change with the times. And if, we talked about Hammer doing it, like everybody gave that guy such grief over that album, such grief. And I'm like, you want him to go in a hole and just disappear forever? What's the guy supposed to do? Is he supposed to never rap again? Like, I don't know, man. I never understood that kind of criticism coming all the time.
Yeah, I mean, somebody has to open that door and somebody has to do things that is going to make the genre commercially successful. And some of the first artists that did that took a lot of grief, but now in a era where hip hop is more marketable than it's ever been, and there's so many placements for hip hop records. There are so many endorsements for hip hop artists. It's just it's unreal in some ways. But uh, MC Hammer had to take a lot of that flack of being the first guy to really come in and get all these endorsements so that other people could see what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. By the way, we talked about Hammer here on the show, kids. That was a fun episode, too. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. And then we follow that up, let's see, Down with the Kings in 93. We talked about that. Great cover, by the way. There's something to be said for the covers of these albums. Crown Royal was the last studio album in 2001. Another great album cover. I mean, it just, this one got mixed reviews as well. It is what it is. But, we talked a little bit before we started about the films. They were in 5 films. I say that they were in 4 films, and then a lip sync battle in 2015, Joseph Gordon-Levitt versus Anthony Mackie. To promote that movie, I assume. But they were in Crush Groove in 85, Big Fun in the Big Town in 86, Tougher Than Leather in 88, of course, Who's the Man in 93.
Crush Groove, of course, a little bit before my time, but again, just foundational for the history of hip hop. Such an iconic movie for a lot of people. It was a big reason some people got into hip hop. It's a big part of some people's hip hop fandom. And of course, they were front and center. They were a big part of that movement.
Dude, well said. And again, the accolades these guys have, the awards they have, the things that they did, like It's Like That and Sucker MC, which was an A/B side in 83, just to kick it off for you. It didn't chart on the Billboard Hot 100. It was groundbreaking release, as we said. Rock Box was the first rap song to be played in heavy rotation on MTV, although it didn't really impact the charts. The album Run DMC, the album went gold, the first for a rap album. So that's something to be said. Over 500,000 units, of course, sold in the U.S. King of Rock peaked at number 80 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is no small feat for a genre that's still developing in 85. The album King of Rock went platinum. Something to be said for that as well. Walk This Way, and then, of course, Phil in 86 just broke all the records. It hit number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 8 on the Hot R&B and Hip Hop Songs chart, and just made, I'm sure, a ton of money. Raising Hell, the album went 3 times platinum in the U.S. I mean, the first rap album to achieve this status. The album peaked at number 3 on the Billboard 200 and number 1 on the top R&B hip hop albums chart. My Adidas didn't chart on the Billboard 100, but it did become a song, cultural anthem, I think you could say, in fashion and music both. I mean, and then Tricky hits, and you got all these songs, man, that are making all this money and getting all this recognition for these guys. Again, we've repeated a bunch here since we started recording here today, but the stuff that these guys did, the things that they accomplished, it's freaking crazy, man. I just can't. I don't know that we've really seen. We definitely haven't seen anything before this. And I think since this, you could maybe say DMX, you could maybe say Jay, but these are 3 guys working together. I don't know, Phil. It kind of feels like they just carved out a place that's never going to really be duplicated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think that you can. They had such a big part in the foundation of hip hop. It feels like I keep saying that, but they were just so pivotal to the genre when it was in its infancy.
Mm-hmm.
That they're forever going to be memorable artists. Like there's no way to go back and duplicate what they did because there's just such a big part of hip hop history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009. Well deserved. Well deserved. Did you? By the way, I've had this conversation with some friends fairly recently. What's your take on Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should just be changed to the Music Hall of Fame? Do you get caught up in all that, or do you care?
I don't really care. For me, I mean, I think at this point it's the award of being a Hall of Famer and all this stuff. It's the prestige that comes with it,
Mhm.
and because there is no Hip Hop Hall of Fame, and there aren't these kind of prestigious labels for other genres, the hip hop. I'm sorry, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has kind of become this catch-all, and I think that that's fine. I mean, that's going to bother some people, but I really don't care.
Yeah, I don't really care. I see why people would want to change the name because it can get wordy if you say the Rock and Roll Hip Hop Rap Hall. I mean, don't get weird, but like the I don't know, the Popular Music Hall of Fame. I don't know. I don't really care either. But you know, the definition of rock and roll has changed over the years as well. Like to me, Phil, rock and roll is guitar, bass, and drums. But I have a hard time saying that Walk This Way is not a rock song with Run DMC rapping on it. I have a hard time, you know, with other songs that you don't see guitar, bass, and drums on stage, but you hear it and the
Yes.
delivery is strong. I mean, DMX, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. I think those lines have been blurred for years now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because there are certain artists that I would call them R&B or I would call them something else, but they're such a big part of their career that you could call rock, for example.
Mhm.
Um, I would not in any way call Michael Jackson a rock artist,
Mhm.
but there are things like Dirty Diana and Thriller that are rock songs.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, Beat It is a rock record. I mean, it might not have always been classified at it, but when you listen to Beat It, that it is a rock record.
It is a rock record, 100%. Yeah, for sure. No question. And you know, the class they went in with, and this is not to discount Run DMC's accomplishments by any means, but dude, they went in 2009 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Little Anthony and the Imperials, Jeff Beck, Bobby Womack, and Metallica. Dude, that's a heck of a class right there, man. There's a lot of great music in just that one class, dude.
Yeah, Bobby Womack is an absolute legend.
Yep. Yep. And this was Run DMC's first year of eligibility, and they got in.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Like,
it just makes so much sense for them. I mean, if you're gonna argue against any other rap group being in there or any other rapper or pop artist or whatever you want to name, um, a big part of why they crossed over was rock music.
mhm. Oh yeah, for sure. That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. How do you not include them in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Oh my. I definitely have no intention of wrapping this up on a sour note, but I think and maybe you'll know more about this than I will. I don't know because I can't say I was entirely plugged in to what Run DMC as an actor were doing in the later years. But man, when Jam Master Jay was killed, I like a lot of people was in shock. Like I just they never struck me as being that kind of band. They weren't. It wasn't about diss tracks. It wasn't about we have a beef with somebody. Dude, they just that's not who they were. So when Jay was killed, I was like, I cannot believe this is happening, man.
It just felt like he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, based on the
Mm.
stories that I've read. Um, and they just found his killer recently, and when you find out that it was somebody he knew, it was somebody in his family, it's just really sad, man. It sounds like he got set up, and it just shouldn't have happened. Shouldn't have happened that way, and that gets into some of the stuff with a lot of these artists and how they make their money. I mean, with everything we've talked about in this podcast, of the big moments they had, uh, opening the door and getting that Adidas deal, and everything they did for Def Jam as a label, everything they did for the culture, and you get to the 2000s, and those guys still have to work. Those guys are still touring acts. They're still having to put out music to make money. And from what it sounds like with Jay, this was just him being involved in some stuff, trying to make some money.
Mm.
And it just shouldn't have been that way, man. He shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, it did. There were rumors that he was dealing cocaine in the 2000s, and his family vehemently denied that. And I think it got messy for a while. I don't know where all that stands now. And I'm certainly not here to bash anyone or make some kind of allegation. It's just sad, man. Like there's just no excuse for that. Like I just don't. I mean, he died at 37. Are you freaking kidding me? Like,
yeah,
man.
Didn't even make it to 50 years old.
No.
Just really, really sad. I mean, like I said, the fact that the trial is just starting with those guys. I believe that was this year.
Mhm.
And he, correct me if I'm wrong, he passed away in 2002, 2003, something like that.
October 30th, 2002.
Okay. But yeah, look at that. That took over 20 years to try his murderers and to finally get some justice for this. I mean, and I don't know the truth of it. I'm not gonna, say that there's any truth to him dealing drugs, but there was some kind of dispute.
Mhm.
There was some kind of thing where it sounds like he was set up based on the story. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just sad. Really, really sad.
Yeah. Again, never should have happened. And honestly, we never, I don't think, even mentioned Run's brother, Russell Simmons. I don't think we ever mentioned him. Dude, without Russell, a lot of this is not happening. I mean, credit where credit's due, man. You talk about a guy that's done well for himself. Like, this guy is he's a big part of their backstory. Rick Rubin's a part of their story. Like
Yes.
certain people that come in, the doc talks about, I think, their road manager, who was a big part of their story, and guys that they valued and trusted. And I can't say this for certain, Phil, because I don't have all the A's and B's of everything that ever happened to these guys, but it kind of felt like that they made a lot of smart decisions with letting the right people into their inner circle, and it paid off big time.
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned Russ at one point because, of course, Def Jam and
That's
Run
right. Yeah.
DMC would not have happened without Russ.
Right.
It's just difficult to speak on him in some ways now because some things he's done tarnished his legacy.
Big time. Jeez.
But yeah, of course, they would not have made it to become nearly as big as they were without Russell and Def Jam and the circle around them. Because again, a big part of their success was the machine of Def Jam and everybody that was a part of it getting behind them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is such a thing as, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. And look, it's not for me, but I give credit where it's due. You talk about two groups of guys who have worked incredibly hard and who have put the time in. But look, they were produced from the ground up.
Mhm.
Those bands, I say bands, those acts don't happen if they had not been built like a building. They were bricks and mortar, and everything was structured. Run DMC came together as friends and started this from the ground up. However, without that support behind the scenes, they don't succeed. And without them, Def Jam doesn't have this group. So I think it works hand in hand, man. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see what you're talking about. It didn't feel like it was quite the like factory build an artist up from scratch like Motown or some of those other labels were doing. Um, but you could tell like all of these people were connected. Even just the fact that we're all friends and my brother is starting this record label.
Mm-hmm.
Like even just that connection, it just made it all feel like it was more organic.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it was built. Like, I mentioned the Monkees earlier. It's a weird reference. Like the Monkees were built. They would not have been the Monkees had the TV studios had not said, we want to do a TV show. Let's put together a band. But to their credit, they took their careers back and said, we're going to become a real band. We don't need this anymore. We're going to do it our own, or we're not going to do it at all. So they did, all due respect, they did manage to take the reins and say, we're going to live and die as a group, a real group, and not something that's just been put together. But again, like I think it would be easy, Phil, for people who don't know the story to look at, the matching hats, the matching tracksuits, the chains, the shades, the Adidas, and the logo and say, this has been built But again, we know that's not true. And honestly, you know, I don't think that works anymore. I mean, the boy band stuff I think is an aberration. I think those bands hit at the right time. For whatever reason, it hit at the right time. The temperature was right for those kind of bands. But Phil, I don't know. Like, one of my biggest problems with pop music in general is that a lot of the stuff is just so overproduced and so manufactured and so artificial that it just, Tom, such and such is the best pop singer ever. All right, well, talk to me in 10 years. Because we're still talking about DMC and the Beatles and the Who and the Stones and Queen. Like, I'm sorry. And it's not about color. I don't care about that. But I don't know, man. Not to rant at the end here, Phil, but, doing things and making an impact and making music that stands the test of time, it seems like sometimes that's a lost art.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Like catching a lick and, you know, getting popular and having like this short run. You see that so more often than a lot of these artists that have like this lasting impact. But I mean, there are the boy bands that, of course, had their lasting impact on music. I mean, it'd be hard to not say that Backstreet Boys did not have an impact on music. Of course, they
Sure,
did.
sure.
NSYNC and I mean, one of the greatest entertainers of all time came from a boy band.
That's fair. Yeah.
Jackson 5 were a boy band. I mean, yeah, you might not want to call it that, but it was. It was a boy band.
Right. Oh, that's fair. Yeah. Anytime I hear the Beatles described as a boy band, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that sounds weird.
It's so odd. First time I read that, I typed like 300 words, and before I hit send, I just deleted it because I'm like, I'm not going to argue with you. Like, what's the point? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that term, of course, happened way after the Beatles phenomenon. I mean, I guess if you want to make it a technicality, they are, but it just still doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, no, it never made any sense to me at all.
I mean, I'm sure some people are looking at me like Jackson 5 are not a boy band, but I mean, again, technicality. Like when you look at like they created this blueprint for what came after them of getting a bunch of young guys together.
Mm-hmm.
I
I mean, you could argue the point and say that they were playing the instruments, and that's true to an extent. But Phil, I can't sit here and say the Jacksons played on every album when they started out. I think they probably had session players. Not that they didn't. I'm sure they did. But Phil, I can't speak on that because I don't actually know what the mix is. Was it 60-40 or 70-30? I don't have any idea. But dude, you see those when they're choreographed dancing on stage, those guitars aren't plugged in. And this is long before power packs. So come on, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, but just the way that Motown did things, the way that they had their streamline of artists. And I mean, there's so many people that talked about Motown, called it almost like an assembly line.
Yeah.
And they were a big part of that label and how other labels did it, of getting a bunch of young guys together and building their entire look and doing all of these things from scratch. There's no way I cannot say that Jackson 5 influenced that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah. Well, kids, as far as Run DMC goes, I think we've hit it hard over this past hour and some change. And I don't want this to be the last time we talk about them because I would like to do an album review at some point. And I think there's some really good material here. And I think Raising Hell is, the one to maybe start with, but we'll see when we get to that. Before we wind this up, man, legacy. And this may be part of your last word as well, but like the legacy of this group, like I don't think we can overstate this because without these guys, certain things don't happen in that genre. You could make the case, Phil, that genre doesn't become the powerhouse it is today. And man, that's a big thing to say because for all we know, another act would have come along. I don't know. But I think that you can make a strong case that the hip hop as a genre doesn't become the behemoth it is today without Run DMC.
And I think that that's incredibly fair because, I mean, I don't think that hip hop would have become what it is without them. I don't think that we would have gotten numerous groups and rap duos that became popular after them. I mean, like you said earlier, I don't think there is a Beastie Boys without them. I don't think we get De La Soul or Lil Brother
Mm,
or Migos or Outkast. I don't think we get any of those groups without Run DMC opening the door first.
great point. Yeah, for sure. Well, there you have it, kids. In a nutshell, as much as we're going to hit it here today, that's Run DMC. As always, thanks for following and subscribing. Be sure to leave your comments, if you will. Tell a friend about us. None of the stuff on boinkstudios.com is behind a paywall, including this show. If you've got an internet connection, baby, that's all you need. And thanks again, as always, for supporting. Phil, before we get out of here, let's try to take this home and get your last word on Run DMC.
One of the most iconic hip hop groups of all time. Impossible to think of like a list of guys that made such a big impact on the genre and that were so pivotal to its success and its growth as those guys. And I mean, I think because of that, a lot of their music stands the test of time, and just them as a group, what they stood for, their look and everything. There's a reason why it's had such a lasting effect.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's a reason for it. There is a steak. There's not just sizzle. There's steak, and again, not trying to crap on anybody, but it's, talk to me in 10 years. That's all I'm saying. When you present to me, Tom, greatest dog ever. Cool. Let's talk in 10 years. Let's see if you're right, and maybe you'll be right. I don't know, but like again, people can hate on Taylor Swift all they want to, unless she just decides to leave the business. And if she keeps recording the way she's doing, I think in 10 years, we're still talking about her. Could be wrong. Who knows? But, we'll see. But for guys like Run DMC, acts like Run DMC, you just, you don't need the two of us in the year 2024 to convince you. If you're not convinced by now, you never will be. But Run DMC are legends. And there's just no other way to say it. The guys just, they carved out a niche where there wasn't one, and they charted uncharted waters and made and covered new ground that had not been covered. And, a lot of people today should take a knee out of respect to Run DMC. And that's on more than one genre of music, not just hip hop. Like, again, this idea of rap rock doesn't exist without these guys. And like Phil said, you got to put up with certain acts like Limp Bizkit along the way too, but which is a true statement. But man, you created a genre without knowing you were going to do it. Maybe you freaking did it. That's huge. And you put your genre on the map. I mean, that's something to take to the Hall of Fame. That's something to tell your great grandkids about, that, hey, that album you're listening to doesn't happen without my band, because we made it happen. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to find any other artists that not just were pioneers for their genre, but, broke down barriers as well, broke down barriers for race. And they were a big part of what got other genres and other people from other genres to take rap seriously.
For sure. For sure. For some reason, Little Richard just popped into my head, because Little Richard spent 20 years screaming at the top of his lungs that you need to respect me. Without me, none of this stuff happens. Like, he's right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, again, credit where credit's due, kids. Run DMC, legendary act, never will be forgotten, and they never should be. So, music, again, that will stand the test of time. And keep your eyes open, kids, for album review. It'll be on the way soon, I promise you. But for now, that is Run DMC. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.